I read news every single day. I know some people don't like to follow world affairs that much. I follow it quite a lot, probably more than the average person. So there's not a great deal shocks me because I realise the world's a tough place and bad things happen in this world. So not a lot sort of really, and that's not that I'm sort of I have no feelings, but it's just that nothing surprises me. But I've just read a report, and I think it's not that it's the worst incident. But basically, the report was that 45 men have been burned alive in Iraq by Islamic State or Daesh, whatever you want to call this group. And it's not like this is the first such massacre at their hands. They've committed countless atrocities since they came to prominence around the middle of last year. And we see similar atrocities by Boko Haram as well on an almost daily basis. So it's not that this is the worst or there hasn't, it's unprecedented, but this had an effect on me. I'm watching Friends actually, the sitcom, and it couldn't be further from the two feelings, a funny TV show, and then just browsing on my computer as I'm watching that, and I came across this, and it just there comes a point when you can't sort of read that sort of shit and not feel something. I feel just sickened and drained by hearing about what this group is doing, and I know I'm not the only one. Every single day there's yet another massacre or another atrocity at the hands of this group. And if it isn't Islamic State, then it's Boko Haram. In fact, I see these two organisations specifically, I know there's others out there, but specifically these two organisations as like spiders encroaching across their respective regions. Boko Haram in West Africa and Daesh, to give it its Arabic word, to give it the word that a lot of people in the Middle East are calling it, spreading across the Middle East, the Levant. In the case of Boko Haram, they're spreading into Cameroon, Chad, and Niger. I heard there was a massacre in a Niger border town today. These have to rank among some of the most ruthless terrorist organisations in history. Both of them are easily rivaling Al-Qaeda for sheer ruthlessness and bloodshed. And I feel sickened to the core. One thing I've noticed whenever Islamic State is mentioned is this kind of blame game and finger pointing as to how it started. And I know there's quite a broad contingent out there who kind of believe that it's a very strong conspiracy theory that it's a US Israeli project. I'm not going to say anything about things being true or not true because frankly I don't know. I've done a little bit of research and there seem to be multifaceted reasons as to how Islamic State came about. It has its origins in another Islamist group headed by, I can't remember the name now, it's a lengthy name, but it was headed by Abu Musab al-Sakari, who was a prominent Jordanian Al-Qaeda militant who was assassinated or killed in about 2004. No, I apologise, a little bit later than that, because he was the mastermind behind the Amman bombing in 2005. He was a ruthless thug, and one of the most prominent terrorists at that time. I find it hard to see much evidence that this is US funded or Israeli funded, because Abu Musab al-Sakari was vocally anti-American and anti-Israeli. So it wouldn't make a great deal of sense that the CIA would fund an organisation that wants to attack America. That doesn't really make a great deal of sense. If they were going to fund an organisation, it would be for their interests. That would make sense. So what I'm getting at is, I'm not saying it's not true, I'm just saying I can't see what the motivation would be. But the Middle East is like a puzzle inside an enigma, inside a maze. It is so complex. So I do believe that the origins of Islamic State probably are multifaceted. I believe a very big factor is the absolute quagmire of the Syrian civil war. And I do believe that like all terrorist organizations, are probably recruiting vulnerable young men and some young women who maybe have nothing else. And that's not to be sort of a sob story. I think what these people do is sadistic, and I believe it's a thoroughly evil organization. But it's not born out of nothing. This is coming from something. One of the things that comes from the Syrian civil war, and I met some Syrians the other night. Like I mentioned in my last video, I watched, or my semi-last video, I watched a documentary I think it was called We Are the Giants. It's about the Arabian Spring, and there was a brief debate at the end of it, and there was a guy that said Islamic State is an illusion or something like that. I don't know where the guy was from, because these were students from all over the Middle East, but he said Islamic State is an illusion. He didn't really specify that, because I'd mentioned it in the debate, and it's very depressing. Not necessarily what they do, which is of course depressing, but what is more depressing is there are no easy answers in how to deal with this problem. I do think it's fickle arguing about who created it and how, because I don't think that necessarily answers the questions. That's for historians to debate, how it began. Really, that is not going to help anyone. What is important is how it is stopped. Because I do believe this is a major, major problem. We're not talking about a small insurgent group. This is an organisation that is causing carnage on a daily basis over a very wide region. They'll never get their caliphate. That simply won't happen. Their vision of getting a caliphate, probably from Pakistan to Morocco, is not going to happen, because there's far too many sectarian divisions in the Middle East. It's just, they cannot kill everyone that opposes them. It's not going to happen. That's the good news, I guess. But the bad news is this is an organisation that, you kill 10, you get 20. It's like Al-Qaeda on steroids. And I don't blame people for not wanting to watch the news when this shit is like every single day. But anyone who's tempted to believe a sob story that these are people who have seen traumatic things and they're just responding to Western aggression, I would put it to you therefore, how does that justify, or how does that rationalise the cold-blooded murder of unarmed civilians? They're not fighting soldiers. At least they're not fighting, they're not exclusively targeting soldiers or powerful figures. Quite often the excuse for Islamists is that, oh well, they are angered by seeing women and children killed by dictators. That might be a factor, but they have zero moral high ground when they end up doing it themselves. And in the case of Boko Haram, I don't think that's the case. I think they're just a fanatical cult. One thing I would say though, I know there's been a meeting, as I understand it, chaired by the White House on how to tackle religious extremism. Actually, I think this was a UN meeting. The Obama administration has been very careful on this. Today, President Obama said that this is a problem that comes from within Muslim communities, but we must be careful not to go down the line of tarring all Muslims with the same brush. Well, that's common sense. But what this administration hasn't done is call this problem what it is: Islamism. Islamism, Islamism, Islamism. Now, I am fed up of seeing comments from, frankly, a lot of Muslim people saying this has nothing to do with Islam. It really bothers me because it is simply not true. Saying that Daesh, Islamic State, and Boko Haram and other such organisations have nothing to do with Islam just isn't reality. I've said this before many times. They may be perverting Islam, and in some cases they don't even bother having the Quran. So I accept they're not mainstream Islam, but the idea that they've got nothing to do with Islam, that's just phony. It is utterly phony. You know, why are they not acting in the name of Buddha or Jehovah? You know, these people say they're acting in the name of Islam. Now, who's going to dispute that? It might widely be contended that they're perverting Islam, but when people say things like that's got nothing to do with Islam, my response is, well, you're just trying to put up a door to this problem. You're just trying to turn a blind eye and pretend it isn't happening. And sometimes analogies are used, like, okay, well, why do you not say that every spree shooter represents Christianity? There is a fundamental difference with this. Where there is other crimes committed by people who are not Muslims, generally speaking, it isn't done in the name of religion. Whereas where Islamist crimes occur, it is done in the name of religion. That is a very fundamental difference. Islamists say they are acting in the name of Islam. You do get extremists in other religions, I'm not saying you don't. But people try to make the analogy like, oh, well, why don't you say that this spree shooter is acting in the name of Christianity? Because the spree shooter has different grievances. Generally, spree shooters don't say God is great when they're killing people, for the most part. You know, it's other things. They're gun nuts, or they're angry postal workers, or... That's not excuses, it's just... The fact of the matter is, there is a specific Islamist problem, and that is not the same as demonizing all Muslims. It's just not. If we can't even talk about this problem without people getting the wrong idea and saying you're Islamophobic, or... It really bothers and depresses me as a human being that I see this shit happening every single day. And the most depressing thing is, what do we do? I mean, Jordan is bombing Islamic State at the moment, or Daesh, let's call him Daesh. Probably won't make any difference, but I'm also convinced that using no force whatsoever isn't going to help. Because for a long time, actually, let's not forget, for a long time, powerful countries didn't use military force in the Syrian civil war against Islamic State. Didn't stop them from growing. Look at the middle of last year when they took over northern Iraq. There were no American troops, there were no British troops, there were no French troops. You know, there was no powerful military stopping them. So that then poses a question, well, if you're saying this is all because of Western military aggression, I think that's too simplistic. I think it could be a factor, of course, but like I say, this is multifaceted. What I'm saying is there are no easy answers. I don't know what the answer is. I don't know. And I would not like to be in the position of President Obama, or David Cameron, or Francois Hollande, or any leader in the Middle East right now, because there are no easy answers. I do think there are certain non-military approaches that can be used. For example, Islamic State have a very powerful propaganda campaign online. Well, why not hit back? Why not launch a propaganda campaign online to equal theirs, to battle their sick, twisted ideology? I think that needs to be stepped up. That would be good, because it's bloodless. You know, it's not military force, but it can be a powerful tool, and I believe it's a necessary tool, because every day these people are getting recruits. Now, it's not too difficult to work out what they're doing. They're showing atrocities, for example, at the hands of the Assad regime. They're radicalizing people. And then these young people come over, they get brainwashed by Islamic State, and they end up, basically, they're slaves to this sadistic cult. Anyway, the conclusion I'll make with this video is, finger pointing really is a waste of time, because that isn't going to solve the problem. There needs to be a united effort to find a solution in solving this. Now, by united effort, I'm not talking about Western countries allying with President Assad, because it could be argued Assad's regime has a very large part to play in the creation of Islamic State. I know it's not about finger pointing, but the problem is it could only create more jihadism by saying, look, the West props up brutal dictators, which is unfortunately true. So the West needs to step very closely and not be too close to the sort of dictators that fuel such anger and resentment. I mean, another example would be Sisi in Egypt. He's not quite as extreme as Assad, but he's still a dictator guilty of some serious human rights abuses. And you know, the Islamic State of today, how do we know in 10 years the Muslim Brotherhood isn't going to morph into that because of the way the Sisi regime has treated their members in Egypt? And I'm not saying I'm sympathetic to the Muslim Brotherhood at all, but you know, they are not as extreme as Islamic State. But if they continue to be, you know, Egypt not long ago sentenced 600 people to death. Egypt uses torture, and we prop up that dictatorship. Not to mention Saudi Arabia. The West has sort of got itself into a position where no matter what position it takes is going to be blamed, because if it sides with dictators to crack down on Islamism, ordinary Arab people are going to say, you're fueling these dictators that oppress us. And if the West does nothing, then you know, helpless people are going to say we're basically being enslaved by this ideology. Anyway, there really are no easy answers, but I do believe that there can be some things that can be done that isn't just militarism. I do believe there needs to be a very, very energetic propaganda campaign. I say propaganda, but I'm talking about throwing facts at these people who are being brainwashed, young, vulnerable people, showing them the sort of shit that they will get into. I mean, it's no good just saying if you join Islamic State, we'll arrest you when you come back. I think there needs to be, and I'm not saying there aren't any measures going on. I know the government has like de-radicalization programs, but clearly it needs to step up and do a lot more in that regard. The gloves need to come off. This is a propaganda war as much as anything, and you know, these people are getting new recruits every day. So how is it this ragtag army are spreading like a virus? And where the hell are they getting their weapons from? That's another question that needs to be asked. So we need to seriously look at issues like our arms fairs in London. London has one of the world's biggest arms fairs. Now where does those weapons end up? We have arms deals with Saudi Arabia. But do the arms end up in the wrong group? In the wrong hands? Although arguably it is in the wrong hands to begin with if it's going to the Saudi dictatorship. That's not only a moral question, it's a practical question. Because it's going to end up biting us as well. Sorry to put it that way, but you know, we're only going to have more 7/7s in the future. And you know, the sort of terrorism that we'll be seeing in the West is minimal compared to the suffering in the Middle East. This is an ideological Cold War that is going to go on and on and on. And there are no easy answers. But I do believe that we need to seriously look at our foreign policy as part of this. Yes, Islamic State are the scum of the earth. I think they're absolutely... I can't think of words strong enough to say what I think of them. And I don't agree with people who come out and say, oh, it's all the fault of the West. I think that's way too simplistic. But a lot of our policies have not helped the situation. Propping up dictatorships, knowingly, whatever the regional interests are, that creates deep resentment and it fuels jihad. It goes without saying. We need a serious review of our foreign policy regarding the Middle East. And I believe we're so deep into this shit that we can't turn back. Anyway, this depresses the hell out of me, and I just needed to get it off my chest.